had a great interview the other day with a gentleman who is releasing a book in the next month or so. And I realized as I read his book that the bulk of his book is all about like tensions, like acknowledging that within leadership, within organizations, there are these tensions that exist. So what you're describing really sounds like a tension issue. And so my question for you is, because as you know, leaders or people that are in positions of leadership or positions of authority, they have a tendency to go all in and say, I'm going to be nothing but this way, confident for like a year, and let's see how it works out, without really reading the situation as it comes up. So when you've seen a lack of the practice of these paradoxes, what's usually true about organizations that lack those things?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say what I see is that people begin to accumulate distorted narratives in their head, maybe inaccurate narratives about what's really going on. We fill vacuums with our own stories, right or wrong, when we're not quite sure what's happening. And we often, because of our amygdala in our brain, start believing the worst. We get fearful and anxious. So I have a metaphor, Will, that I think best answers that question. I love to teach leadership principles through metaphors, images. The image I use for what I'm about to say, for what I'm trying to say, is dentists and cavities. I know that's random. Here's what I mean. Have you ever noticed when you go to the dentist and the dentist finds a cavity in your mouth, he or she will say, "Ooh, found a cavity. Could you stay a little bit longer right now and I'll fill it right now? Or if not, could you come back as soon as possible so I can fill it?" And we all know the reason they say that is because they know if they don't fill that cavity, something else, like bacteria, is going to fill that cavity. So it is with teams. When leaders don't fill the cavities in our minds with the accurate information, with the right story, the true story of what's really happening, we'll make up stuff because we're anxious. We don't lack IQ, we lack EQ. So I believe when we're not reading our people and reading the situation, the culture, as you mentioned before, we're going to come up with people that, well, smart people could do really dumb things. Can I say that here? And so far too often we say that. So I think the eight paradox is all about me be very wise in every circumstance I'm in to know exactly what's needed to get the people to the goal.
I think you gave us one of the examples of the eight paradoxes when you mentioned confidence versus humility. So obviously that's one of them. Can you give us a rundown of that as well as the other seven?
Yeah. Well, Will, you thank you for being so for this book. I appreciate it. But I give case studies on each one of these eight paradoxes. So my case study on confidence and humility was Bob Iger. Here's the CEO of Disney who came into this enterprise, the Disney enterprise. He'd been in network TV, but he'd never led anything as eclectic as Disney that sold plush toys and theme park tickets and movies. So he comes in very humble saying, "Listen, I don't know what we're doing here. Coach me up." And he talked to his own direct reports and they were telling him what he needed to know, but they became for him because he was asking for their help. So he said, you can't let humility keep you from leading, but you got to come in not pretending that you know everything. So confidence and humility would be number one. Another one was, I think great leaders practice both vision and blind spots. They leverage their vision. We all need a goal, but they also leverage the blind spots that maybe keep experienced leaders from even trying something because they go, well, that won't work. Well, sometimes a young leader comes in and goes, I'm going to give it a shot. And they don't know better. So my case study there was Sarah Blakely, who started Spanx in her 20s before she knew what was going on, but it succeeded because she didn't know the industry she was going into. Another one is, I think great leaders practice visibility and invisibility. So they know when to be present and be visible and model the way. And they also know the moments where they need to get out of the way, get out of the room. So perhaps another leader will step up and do what they need to do. My case study here was Dr. Martin Luther King, who realized after the I Have a Dream speech, I need to begin stepping back and letting a young John Lewis step up in that meeting. And John would call him and say, Dr. King, you're not in the room. We need you here. And he would say, no, you don't. You know what to say, John. You step up, buddy. And of course, John did. So I just love that one, by the way. I'm in the stage of my career where I need to be more invisible now for my team. Because if I'm in the room, they're going to defer to me. Dr. Tim, what should we do? So anyway, that's another one. One of my favorites. I think great leaders are stubborn and open-minded. And Truett Cathy was my illustration there. Dan Cathy, we all know Dan Cathy, the chairman at Chick-fil-A, said, my dad, who started Chick-fil-A, was the most stubborn man I ever met and the most open-minded man I ever met. But he knew what to be stubborn on, his core, and he knew he needed to be open-minded on everything else in order to adapt and grow. Brilliant. Another one, I think great leaders are deeply personal and yet inherently collective, meaning they know how to be general to let people know I get the big picture, but they also know how to speak personally to an audience to say, I know your struggle and I'm with you on this. I get your life. That's huge. I think great leaders are teachers and learners. I think great leaders have both high standards and gracious forgiveness. So John Maxwell did this for me in my 20s. My gosh, you know, John has excellent standards, and anything short is not acceptable. But I also noticed if I was pushing myself to meet that standard and I failed, he was the first one to step in and forgive and say, let's try it again. So I thought, oh my gosh, it's like a safety net. Push for everything he wants, but I know I'm not going to be fired if in pushing I don't meet the goal. And then the last one, I saved it for last, Will. I think the best leaders I know are both timely and timeless. So they're very current on technology and they're always upgrading the way they get things done, but they've got timeless principles they lead by and they don't leave those timeless virtues behind. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry I went on so long, but those are the 8 paradoxes I try to cover in the book.